Abu. Abu.
Amen.
Abu.
Amen.
I finished Baba Shassi, so we're about to get started. When you're in the tree, I'm not going to should I do it in tree or in English?
English. A little bit, I guess, more English than, but definitely drop the gems.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. This is a talk when I first met our esteemed and distinguished Wala and Ashley. I was about to give this presentation, so I gave them like a general overview of what it was going to be. So this is that. So this is Black equals African Lives Matter and Decolonizing the Academy. Basically the background is that when we're here at University of Ghana, here in Africa, if you ask students anything about Africa, they have no idea. But then you ask them about Napoleon and Julius Caesar and Queen Victoria, they know all of it. So basically the idea is that we need to decolonize the academy and then also tying it into Black Lives Matter.
And these are Ghanaian students who don't know this. So why is that the case? They're also getting that European education.
Exactly, a very colonial type of education, miseducation as I prefer. I prefer to call it miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. And that's what we have going on here. You know, and it's just, you need to know enough to pass the test and, you know, finish. And then this is in Meta Jet, which is time in the sense of continuous time, and the head, which is time in the sense of recurring time. So throughout space and time, eternity. So this is Carter G. Woodson. Who knows Carter G. Woodson?
Well, my Sankofa creator.
There we go. 1, 2. Anybody else? 3. All right, well, that's very good. He wrote a book called Miseducation of the Negro, very important text for everyone to read. And from here, he has a quote. He says, "Every man has 2 educations, that which is given to him and the other that which he gives to himself. Of the 2 kinds, the latter is by far the most desirable. Indeed, all that is most worthy in man he must work out and conquer for himself. It is that which constitutes our real and best nourishment. What we are merely taught seldom nourishes the mind like that which we teach ourselves." And I thought it was a very profound thing. Now, as I give presentations, just so no one falls asleep, I always do a call and response. So in this case, when I say black, I want you to say lives matter. Black?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
Same thing, because black and African are synonyms. If I say African, I want you to say lives matter. African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Much easier for you than it is for me, but easy either way. Another quote from, well, it's attributed to Harriet Tubman, first came out in 1993, attested in my soul, it's backed by Dorothy Riley. She says, "I freed thousands of slaves. I could have freed thousands more if they had known they were slaves." Some people say they're not sure if she actually is quoted with saying this, but either way, I think it's a very profound, you know, statement that you have to know that you're in a position that you need to be free from before you can do anything about that situation, especially if we're talking about mental enslavement and things of that nature. Black?
Lives matter.
See who's paying attention? Let's continue. So this is a very graphic illustration of what I'm talking about as a situation here in Ghana. Now, if I mention King Scorpion, how many people know King Scorpion? Not yet, you will. Or Djibouti Mess? Not yet, okay. How many have ever heard of Herodotus? Feel free, raise your hand. All right, okay. So when we talk about history, usually Europeans refer to Herodotus as a father of history. Now he was around 484 to 425 BCE, but long before him, the earliest historical text in the history of the entire world was here on what they call the Scorpion Tableau, written by King Scorpion, and that's dating to 3250. So this is the earliest historical document on the face of the entire planet Earth. So how can you be a father and be thousands of years after the very first one, right? There's a proverb that says it's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children. Because how did you get here? So again, and then what is said to be the most graphic illustration of history that's devoid of hyperbole and things of this nature is another text by Jehuti Mes, which is 1481 to 1425 BCE. This is literally a full 1,000 years before Herodotus. Again, writing down the history of when he was able to conquer Megiddo. When they say Megiddo, that's the source of the word Armageddon. They say Armageddon is coming. They're talking about what this African did in Megiddo because he sieged it and destroyed that town. And the idea is that anytime you want to talk about sheer destruction, then you refer back to what Jehuti Mes was able to do, right? Jet black African, just as he's shown here. There's actually a picture from the museum in Wasset where I was able to go and get this picture. We continue. So when people talk about the idea of divine savior or monotheism, again, you have to go back to ancient Kemet. Now, if I talk about Jesus, how many people have ever heard that term before? That word before? Most. Or Caesar Borgia, this is the model of Jesus. So when you get your white Jesus, it wasn't until the late 1400s that they even had the idea, let's decide to paint Jesus white. So before that, you had the original Holy Trinity, which was here in Africa, and they just kept it exactly as they took it from Africa. It wasn't until Pope Alexander VI decided, why are we worshiping images that look like black people when we're not black? Which is a very profound thought. That's good for you, pat you on the head. So he decided to use the image of his illegitimate son, Caesar Borgia, as the first one. So then he commissioned Da Vinci, all of these painters who you may have heard of, in order to do the paintings that have now come down, and you see them all throughout Ghana. But it's a very, very recent innovation to even have these white types of images. But the whole story of Jesus, if he was able to go back about 4,000 years in time, he would have read his entire life story because it's plagiarized wholesale from the story of Heru. So the original Holy Trinity was Osar, Oset, and Heru. The idea of Judgment Day, you can read that again on the pyramid text. The idea of death and resurrection of the Savior, again, you get that from Heru's father, Osar. So all of these things, the idea of 12 disciples was the 12 constellations. So all of these things that they plagiarized from, you could find in Kemet long before. And then Akhenaten is credited with founding exclusionary monotheism. So even before that, in the coffin text in the book of Coming Forth by Day, you have the idea that the Creator is one. And it says, you are one and only one who has no second. You are one but with many arms. So that's the idea of monotheism. So when you're talking about the different Neteru, and Neteru is what they refer to the divinities or deities as, and those are just seen as different arms of the same Creator. Black?
Lives matter.
Good. African?
Lives matter.
I'm seeing who's paying attention. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Very good. So Akhenaten, he came up with this idea of, and he banned all of the other temples and said, in order to get to Aten, the Creator, you have to go through me. So when you get this idea of the way, the truth, and the light, I'm the only path to get to the Father, he is the one who came up with that idea. We continue.
Dr. Kambon, sorry.
Yes.
Can you move the projector back to make it a little bit
Make it bigger, okay, no problem. Let's do that without destroying anything. Now, if I say the name Einstein, how many people have heard that name before? Good. Hopefully, we've also heard of Imhotep.
Yes.
So this is the world's first multi-genius, 2650 to 2600 BCE. This is his name written, Imhotep. And as you see, a jet black African. Now, this is the text that I referred to you yesterday, African philosophy of the Pharaonic period. Now, there's a reason why generally you have people who know this name, but when you say Imhotep, usually my students, if they've ever heard the name Imhotep, they say, oh, that was an evil mummy who did something, 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 something. And this is miseducation. There was apparently some Hollywood movie, which I never saw, where Imhotep was depicted as an evil something, something who was rampaging, killing, murdering, yeah. Now, imagine if we took their heroes and depicted them in the same way. You understand? So they knew very well who Imhotep was, but they said, this is a black man, so we're going to vilify him But if we said your white Jesus was a rapist, murderer, so forth and so on, then it would be World War III. If you said Muhammad was so, it would be World War IV, right? Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Very good. So he's credited with writing multiple mathematical texts and then also with the very first monumental stone structure on the face of the planet Earth. Also, he rose from being a commoner to the highest rank in the entire land, the Chati, which is what they refer to as a vizier in ancient Kemet, on the strength of his own merit and genius. So the world's first multi-genius, and when they say multi-genius, it means in multiple areas. And the question becomes, all right, how come we know this name but we don't know this name? What's more important if we're going to be objective? The first genius in the history of the world or any other that come after, right? So we're getting to the intentionality by which people don't know this. Also, we have Hesi Ra. Now, whenever doctors become doctors, they take the Hippocratic Oath, right? Now, Hippocrates, he worshipped Imhotep. So when he says that he worships at the side of Asclepios in the temple of Asclepios, Asclepios was the name for Imhotep, right? But Hesi Ra was a contemporary of Imhotep and is credited as being the world's first physician, right? Now, how many people have heard of Hesi Ra? Right? This is telling us something. This is the point that I'm making here. Now here you see he got an afro. He looks just like some of our brothers here in this classroom right now. So how come we've heard of Hippocrates but we haven't heard of Hesi Ra? And he's the first physician. Something is afoot. Will we continue? And there's a text here, Ancient Egyptian Medicine by J.F. Nunn, where he actually goes into this. And again, this isn't secret information that is hidden somewhere. These are scholarly texts, University of Oklahoma Press. They're not keeping it hidden, but for some reason it's not filtering down to us as we grow up. This should be the first information that we get as we grow up, especially those of us who want to go into medicine. And perhaps it would make us want to go into medicine if you knew that the very first physician in the history of the entire planet Earth looked exactly like you. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
And you have to know this before you really know why they matter. So writing philosophy, this is the world's first book in the history of the entire planet Earth, Harjadef. But this one only exists in a fragmentary form, and this is Harjadef. And sometimes when we hear about writing and philosophy, we think of who? Socrates. Now look at the dates, 470 to 399 versus Harjadef 2521. Very first book in the history of the entire planet Earth. I should say very oldest surviving text, because in Kemet we had even texts before that, but this is the oldest one that's been discovered up to this point, right? And again, you can read another scholarly text, Miriam Lichtheim, Ancient Egyptian Literature, a book of readings, and it translates this text, right? Now, how many people have heard of Harjadef before? How many people have heard of Socrates before? This is the point we're making here. The idea of a virgin birth of divine savior. This is Auset, right? So this is the mother of Heru, right? Identified also with the constellation. So when they talk about Sar, that's associated with the constellation called Orion. The easiest way to see it is that it's these three stars in a line. If you can't pick out anything else, you can pick out Orion, what they call Sahu. Now those three stars, they point directly to the star associated with Auset. So those three stars are associated with the father, Asar. They point to Sapdet, which is associated with Auset, the mother. And then they point on the winter solstice to where the sun, which is identified with Heru, rises on that day. So if you ever wonder why you celebrate December 25th, it's because of what's going on celestially with these formations. Orion, Sapdet, what they call Sirius, and those point directly to where the sun rises on that day. And that's where they calculate ages. If you ever hear someone, age of Aquarius, age of Pisces, age of whatever, it's talking about what constellation is in the background as this celestial event goes on. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Now, oftentimes we'll hear about Mary and Jesus, this depiction, which is a very recent one, but you have to go to the original one. They still kept it black, and you can still find the black Madonna and child all throughout Europe, but it wasn't until the late 1400s that they got the idea of, we're white. Let's make who we worship look like us, right? But the question now becomes, when do we as black people get rid of these white images and say the exact same thing? Why are we worshiping someone who doesn't look like us, right? And you can look at John G. Jackson, Christianity Before Christ, and there are between 450 and 500 images of this black Madonna and child all throughout Europe. So then the other question becomes, when they have all these black images all throughout Europe, you can't turn left without tripping over one of them. How come when they came to enslave and colonize us, they left those black images and brought us the white ones that we found on the back of trotros all throughout Ghana? Black, African, black, African, black, African. Y'all gotta keep up now. And this is the second oldest text, Kagimni. So usually in the Western tradition, they go from Socrates to Plato, so forth and so on, Aristotle. Well, we went from Hardjadef to Kagimni, again 2345, 2333. And if you look at him, he is jet black African, just like anybody else in this room. Now, how many people have heard of Kagimni? Whose name translates, it's the same as when we say Okra in Chi, the Kagimni, which is the soul search for me. But we don't hear about him, we hear about Plato. Again, you can read Merriam-Webster, ancient Egyptian literature for a translation. Again, it's not enough to just say, oh, we invented writing and pat ourselves on the back. What do we write down? This is a deep philosophical, moral, ethical text, right? And if we read it, we would probably be doing a lot better, because instead of reading about how to live your life ethically, we read things like The Prince by Machiavelli. We read all these perverted, twisted, so forth and so on, and that becomes our window to the world. Black,
Lives matter.
African,
Lives matter.
Well, if you look at his complexion, it should become very clear of why we've never heard his name. Not because he isn't important, but because he's black. We continue. And then we come to the oldest surviving book in full. So Hardjadef, you have the end of it. Kagimni, you have the beginning of it. This one we have basically the entire text. This is the instruction to Ptah. So this is usually given credit as the oldest book. Now, if you look at him very closely, I want to see if y'all can pick this out. Look. See a resemblance? Got the lots and everything, right? So y'all thought it started with Bob Marley. Nope. You got to go back some 4,300 years to see the author of the oldest book. Now, how many people have heard of Ptah?
I think I have heard.
Right? This is, the problem that we're getting at, right? But how many people have heard of Shakespeare? Full coverage. But if we ask, objectively speaking, what's more important, the oldest book in the history of the entire world, or some syphilitic, some guy off in the butt crack of Europe somewhere, right? If we're speaking objectively, it has to be Ptah. But then the question becomes, how come you've heard of Shakespeare but you haven't heard of Ptah? When you look at his complexion, it should become very clear as to the reason why. Right? Black,
Lives matter.
African,
Lives matter.
black,
Lives matter. Lives matter. Lives matter. Lives matter. Lives matter.
black,
Lives matter.
African. Then we come to Wenif. This is the oldest spiritual text in the history of the entire planet Earth. And it is in what are called the pyramid text. This is the first of the pyramid text. So inside of his pyramid, picture this wall and picture every single inch covered with nothing but writing. Arranged perfect lines, symmetrical, geometrically aligned, all of these things. That's the inside of his pyramid. And in it, that's where you have what I was mentioning before, the very first concept of judgment, the very first concept of Holy Trinity, the very first concept of death and resurrection of the Savior. I can go on and on and on, right? But you can find this in here. Black,
Lives matter.
African,
Lives matter.
I'm doing it for you because you're looking very sleepy.
So, in New York, growing up, I often heard like, oh, well, Shakespeare was a black person, this person was a black person, they lied. So, what I want to ask is it not that they weren't necessarily black, but the first person who achieved what they're so-called first being the pioneers of were black, not necessarily that Shakespeare was black or Beethoven was black. But, yeah, is that?
For here, the reason why you hear about Shakespeare is for the exact same reason why you don't hear about Ptah. whether Ptahhotep is black or not is not even up to question, just look at his picture. You understand? So the whole point is that they will only give you the names of Europeans, or I should say Eurasians in general. So all throughout Europe and Asia are not separate continents, just look at the map, it's just one big landmass. So they'll give you the name of any Eurasian, but the person whose name they should give you, they don't give to you, and that's for the exact same reason. The reason you hear about this guy is the exact same reason you don't hear about this guy, right? And there's a quote from Napoleon where he was trying to reconquer Haiti, and he says, what I do is not so much for economic reasons, but to stop the forward march of blacks in the world. So he went to the two most important places for black people, one Haiti, and then two Kemet, right, in order to stop the forward march. So basically the world is upside down, white is on top, black is on the bottom. And the scariest thing to all these Eurasians is things going back to the way that they were. So not letting you know about this is part of their self-preservation technique to make sure things don't go back to the way that they were for the majority of human history. Right here. If you come out directly down that corridor to the left. So we continue. This is the pyramid text of Wendy's. This is the oldest pyramid text. And again, all those spiritual concepts that people now associate with Christianity or Islam or whatever, you find them all here. And this is Wendy's name here. And this Shenu, what they call a cartouche. And again, you can read this entire thing, Raymond O. Faulkner, the ancient Egyptian pyramid text. But when people think about spiritual texts, they think about the King James Version of the Bible. Now, which one is more important, objectively speaking, where he plagiarized all of those concepts from, or the very source of them? The source. Black?
Lives matter.
African.
Lives matter.
Lives matter.
African.
Lives matter.
Good. But again, there's a reason why we hear about this guy looking nice and white and pale. I shouldn't say nice. And then we don't hear about this guy looking jet and black, right? Nice and jet and black.
Dr. Kambon, is there a key to get to the bathroom?
Oh, it's locked.
Should I ask? I can ask someone.
Yeah, if you can.
Okay.
If you can, matter of fact, go across to the archives directly on the other side, and that's what we'll watch on there.
Okay.
I think that's the,
Get the bathroom.
these texts, Shakespeare's texts are stolen from black.
Okay. So now we come to Lady Pesachet, right? Lady Pesachet. Now, look at her. We don't even need to say anything. Look at Lady Pesachet. She is the very first doctor in the history of the world. Female doctor in the history of the world. Right? Going back 2400 BCE. Now, we don't hear about her, but all nurses, they take this Florence Nightingale pledge. Right? So, again, there's a reason why nurses have to, just like doctors have to hear about Hippocrates, nurses have to hear about Florence Nightingale. But the question becomes, why don't we hear about Lady Pesachet? If you just look at her, that's the reason why we don't hear about her. Right? I hope everybody is following along. Right? Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Again, you can look at the same text I mentioned before, Ancient Egyptian Medicine by J.F. Nunn. Now when we talk about human nature and social relations, the oldest text that we can find on this, the instructions to Mary Carré, 2075. Now, oftentimes people say, oh, you know, we started with these sociological things in class and so forth and so on with Karl Marx. Well, in the instructions of Mary Carré, it's actually talking about human nature and why it's trying to explain why Eurasians out of Eurasia behave the way that they do. And in it, and I quote, it says, lo, the miserable Asiatic. He's wretched because of the place that he's in, short of water and bare of wood. His paths are many and numerous and difficult because of mountains. It says that he snatches from a lonely road, but he cannot steal from a populous town. But basically it's saying because of their environment, that's why Eurasians behave the way that they do, as thieves, darting about within a group, all of these things. So again, it's giving an environmental understanding of the reason why folks like this guy behave the way that they do, right? Now this has come up again in Sheikh Anta Diop's two cradle theory, but basically it's saying the exact same thing that Mary Carré was saying over 4,000 years earlier, where he's saying in the northern cradle you had this harsh, snowy type of place, and in there, that's the reason why they come up with these ideas of might makes right. Only the strong survive, survival of the fittest. There are very few resources, so if I have a bigger club, then I can whack you upside the head and get your resources, and then might makes right, right? As opposed to the African concept in the African context where it wasn't like that. So that's the two cradle theory, southern cradle and northern cradle. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
Very good. We continue.
Mary Carré
Oh, yeah,
was basically saying they're cave people.
basically.
Okay.
Right. And matter of fact, let me go back because this is another text where Marx and Engels' White Racist by Carlos Marr, the proletarian, and he spells it like this, specifically Aryan outlook of Marxism. And he goes into all these texts where Marx was being very much like the racist that he was. Right? It's worth looking that up. You can find it on JSTOR or anywhere else online as a PDF. Sobek Neferu, the first female ruler, outright ruler. So even before her, you had Nephotep, who is there's some dispute as to whether she was a regent or an outright ruler. There's no dispute on Sobek Neferu. So sometimes people say, oh, in Africa, maybe one day we'll get more female presidents, like this is a new thing. The very first female ruler in the history of the entire planet Earth was right here in Africa. Right? So the question now becomes, is any progress really progress when you are really coming from here? Right? What you've done is made progress on a neo-colonial model and acting like this is something new. And this is only because we don't know our ancient history. Right? However, people talk about Queen Elizabeth I or whoever, right? So when we say Queen Elizabeth, usually people know this. When I say Sobek Neferu, how many people have heard of Sobek Neferu? All right, that's my point. And you can read the political situation in Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period by Kim Reichelt. When we talk about literature, this is what I mentioned yesterday as the very first epic in the history of the entire planet Earth, where he left Kemet, went to southwestern Eurasia, and then came back, making that full epic cycle. So this is coming back just about 4,000 years ago. Now, how many people have heard of Sanhat? Good, one. Now, how many people have heard of Homer? This is exactly my point. Now, it's even questionable as to whether Homer was even a historical figure, right? This one we know that Sanhat, we have texts, multiple copies of this text all throughout because it was one of the most popular pieces of literature in ancient Kemet. And again, you can read Aikwe Arma Sanhat, an official of ancient Kemet, a multilingual translation of an ancient African hieroglyphic text. And again, this is one of the texts that they translate from Akan, Bambara, all these African languages and also European languages. Black?
Lives matter.
You're paying attention. African?
Lives matter.
Very good. But again, this is to the point of intentionality. It's intentional that they tell you about Homer, but they don't tell you about Sanhat. Right? Again, when we talk about some of the greatest female rulers, it's a toss-up between Hatshepsut. Most people would say it's Hatshepsut. And we're going back 3,500 years, or Queen T, who even though she didn't rule, Hatshepsut did rule as an outright ruler, right? Queen T, she did not rule as an outright ruler, but as Amenhotep III started to decline in health, she started to the point that letters to the ruler were addressed specifically to her. And she looks a lot like my wife. Actually, if we get done, I actually want us to go to our cultural center so you can meet my wife and children. It depends on the time. That would be awesome. So again, Hatshepsut, and you see what she looks like us here in this room. And then Queen T. We don't hear about her, but we hear about Queen Victoria. Why? The question becomes why? Indoctrination, miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. Now, miseducation is telling you the wrong thing. Diseducation is making sure we don't tell you anything. We just blank you out. Then anti-education is once you start to finally in your old age learn about this information, you kick against it. No, I don't want to know about it. Queen Victoria is all I need to know. Where you now become an agent in making sure that you don't learn. You become against education, right? Black
Lives matter.
African
Lives matter.
You can read Black Women in Antiquity by Ivan Van Sertima on both of these African women. Again, when we talk about peace, you have Akhenaten, who in one of his boundary stela, he said that he will not go beyond this boundary. That unlike the predecessors before him who were very warlike, he said that he is just going to be in Akhetaten just to worship the Aten, right? So he was basically, and what ended up happening was that he lost a lot of the gains that were made before his time because he didn't want to go to war. And then also Ramesses II was the author of the very first peace treaty in the history of the entire planet Earth, a copy of which is in the United Nations. So again, this is not secret information. You can go to the United Nations and read a copy of the very first peace treaty. So the question becomes, how come we don't hear about him all growing up through school when they talk about peace? However, what we do hear about is Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. As a matter of fact, they put a statue up of that virulent racist right here at the University of Ghana, where he said black people are 1 degree removed from an animal, half heathen, savage Kafirs. This is what he said when he was in South Africa. He actually became a sergeant major fighting against the Zulus in the Bambata Rebellion. So people think about him as about peace, but they don't know that he was a soldier fighting against black people. Then when he went back to India, he fought against the black people there, the Dalits, right? The black untouchables of India. So if we don't know our history, then our enemies select our heroes for us, and then they laugh as we, celebrate these same heroes, so-called, who called us animals. Black,
Lives matter.
African,
Lives matter.
like, how can you really understand that Black lives matter if you don't know that you've ever done anything that mattered? And that's the whole point. We'll tell you you've never done anything. Well, what does my life matter? Black people can't do anything. That's the desired end result, right? You can read Yosef Ben Yakin, An African Mother of Western Civilization, on this as well. You can also read these texts about Gandhi, the South African Gandhi stretcher bearer empire, where he was serving as a stretcher bearer in the Corps for the British Empire, who he said to the British that we're partners in colonization against these savage Kafirs, referring to the black people there. You can also read Arundhati Roy, The Doctor and the Saint, or G.P. Singh, Gandhi Behind the Mask of Divinity. We continue.
Is the statue still here?
Still here.
There was a protest last year.
No,
That's what
there
happened.
wasn't a protest.
There was supposed to be a protest last year.
Yeah, so the situation was that the old government said they were going to remove it, but then they got voted out. So we are still in the process of getting the new government to uphold what the old government said that they were going to do. We're coming back to that. The idea of the world as round. Here, this is Weresh Nefer's sarcophagus that you can find in the Metropolitan Museum. So when you go back to New York, you can actually go and see one of the earliest depictions of the world as round, right? However, we don't hear about Weresh Nefer, even though it's right there in New York. How many people have heard of Weresh Nefer? Weresh Nefer? That answers the question. But again, you can see the world as round carved in stone, 380 to 300 BCE. But we don't hear about him, but oftentimes we'll hear about Galileo. Has anyone ever heard the name Galileo before?
Yeah.
So how come what is carved in stone and what you can go and see right now when you go back to New York, we don't hear about it? Right? Once we understand what's going on, then it should become very clear. Also, the New World. You have, has anyone ever heard of Mansa Musa?
Yes.
He said, that one we got. Now, when Mansa Musa went on his famous pilgrimage, he was interviewed in Egypt, where they asked him, how did you come to become the Mansa of Mali? He said, I became the Mansa because my maternal uncle decided to take a voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. The very first fleet went across, it got destroyed. He came back and went with an even larger fleet, and that one never came back. So once he abdicated the throne, that's how I became the Mansa. So in his own testimony of how he even came to be the ruler, he says it's because his maternal uncle sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. Right? according to Christopher Columbus, in his diaries, he says that when he went to the people at what's now Haiti and Dominican Republic, Hispaniola, he said the people there said that they got the gold on their spear tips from the black people who had already been there. So then Columbus didn't believe it. He wanted to have metallurgists go and test it, and they tested it and said, this is the exact same thing we're getting from the west coast of Africa, from the Mindi traders, right? And then we left all of this evidence here, these multi-ton boulders there in Central America, in places like La Venta, San Lorenzo, right? Tres Zapotes. And this one they call it El Negro, because obvious reasons. You can see the afro on this brother. The other ones they say, no, he's wearing a helmet. No, that's the people who are there. This one they can't say anything, so they just try not to tell you anything about it. But this one is clearly an afro, and clearly looking like all of us here in this room. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Right? So you can actually go and find these in museums. As a matter of fact, when I was in Chicago, they had an exhibit that was going around the country, the third route, and it was talking about the black presence in Mexico, and it was giving all of these statues as evidence of the ancient black presence there. Of course, anthropologists say, no, this isn't a black person, it's a monkey. They say they have another one where it's a brother looking up like this and they call it monkey looking up at the sky. And when they don't say that, they say, no, that's just the people who are already there, and they're talking about the modern people who we associate with being in that place. But very obviously, this one, they call it El Negro, and then they just keep that out of the conversation altogether. Right? The other ones that have helmets, they say, oh, well, whatever. This one isn't wearing a helmet, it has an afro, they don't know what to say about it. But we can continue on. Again, you can read Ivan Van Sertima, they came before Columbus. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Has anyone ever heard of Christopher Columbus album? Right?
You have no choice.
You have no choice. So then the question becomes, how come we don't hear about Abu Bakr II? And again, none of this is secret information, but we hear about Christopher Columbus. Where's Abu Bakr II day? You haven't heard it yet. But when you look at the depiction of the Mansa, it should become very clear as to why. Then we talk about the very first free republic in the West. We can talk about Africans like Gaspar Yanga from 1545 in Mexico. Ganga Zumba in Brazil, 1630. Zumbi dos Palmares, 1695. So all of these Africans, they founded republics where there was no enslavement. Now to this very day, you know, when they talk about George Washington being the first president, America is still not a free republic because slavery still exists according to the 13th Amendment. I wrote an article on that. There's actually a new documentary that came out called 13th that goes into the exact same thing. It says slavery nor servitude shall exist within these United States except for for punishment for a crime. That means it can't exist if we just say that you're a criminal. And that's what they do. They just say black people are criminals. And right now you have more black people working for free in the prison industrial complex than were enslaved in 1850, just by sheer numbers. And you can read Irene Diggs Zumbi in the Republic of Os Palmares, Palmares in African state in Brazil, and other texts as well. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
Ah.
Lives matter.
Then we talk about women warriors. We can talk about Amani Shaketo. Has anyone ever heard of Amani Shaketo? Right? Of what we now refer to as ancient Nubia, right? Or, you know, it goes by different names. Or we could also talk about Mwine Njinga Mbande,
Yeah.
right? That one we got.
They actually have her in the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Okay, wonderful.
Just to kick it off that we were not just slaves.
Okay. And now that's good, but the challenge is what Ivan Van Sertima referred to as the 500-year box, where they only let you know what happened in the last 500 years, right? And what it does is it prevents you from getting a trajectory to know that this is where you were coming from, now you've gone to this spot. That if they keep you in this 500-year box set, there's nothing before Europeans came to Africa, just a fog and a mist, right? So then it's very hard for you to understand how things relate to each other in terms of historical thing. So it's good that they have Queen Njinga there, but again, they try not to go beyond that, and that's off limits. Ancient African history is off limits.
Oh yeah, it's very limited. It's
All you're allowed to know is what your enemies wrote down in the Bible, in the Hyksos. So again, you can read Black Women in Antiquity, I'm Van Sertima. However, how many people have heard of Joan of Arc? Right? Even if you don't even know who she is, you're going to hear her name. Right? But you have women warriors long before. Now, Amanishakheto was known for defeating Rome and preventing Rome from colonizing Ethiopia. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Good. Some of us are saying black sleep matter.
What does the CE? I forget what it's in the.
That's contemporary era, and BCE before contemporary era. And that's a more neutral way of referring to time than exactly. So when we talk about military acumen, we could talk. How many people have ever heard of Napoleon?
Oh, sorry, flip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how many people have heard of Dessalines? Dessalines, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So Emperor Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Now, it should interest you who may not have heard of him that this is the military genius who defeated Napoleon. So the question becomes, how come we know about the loser, but we don't know about the winner? When you just look at him, much like the ancient ones that I showed you, it should be very clear. Because the point is to make you think that you've never done anything. And there's a quote by Renoko Rashid that I'll come to, but it really encapsulates what we're going into. You can read Jacob Correll's The Irritated Genie, an essay on the Haitian Revolution, if you're interested in learning more.
was Tucson before or after?
Tucson was before.
Okay.
Tucson was before.
It's the irritated genius.
Irritated genie. And the idea is that these whites were always trying to rub on the bottle and say, give us more this, give us more free labor, give us more money, the Pearl, the Antilles, give us more. Eventually the genie is going to get irritated and say no more wishes, right? And that's what happened in Haiti, right? And this is right here at the University of Ghana. One of my former students did a short documentary behind the lines, and at the beginning of the documentary, she went through University of Ghana asking questions just like what we're dealing with here. Let's see. Hopefully you can hear.
Have you ever heard of Julius Caesar? Yes, sir. Julius Caesar, yes, I have.
Julius Caesar, yeah. I have. Julius Caesar, yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
What about Imhotep?
Have you heard of Imhotep?
Imhotep. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
What is that?
No? What is that?
No, I haven't.
Right? So this is here on the University of Ghana campus. Students, professors, they've never heard of the most important human beings ever to walk the face of the planet, but random white people, they know all of them. This is by design. This is intentional. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
How can you think your life matters if you think you've never done anything? Right? That's the whole point, is to make you think you've never done anything. Then if 1,000 people die in Nigeria, who cares?
Yeah.
But then if 5 whites get shot in Paris, oh, we cry for Paris, let's all change our avatars on Facebook, whatever.
How many students are taking Africana studies here? on
All of
campus?
them have to take the
They
200
do.
level. All of them have to take the 200 level. That's second year, what the equivalent of sophomore year. So they
Okay.
have to take Intro to African Studies. And it's a total of 3 weeks devoted to the history of the people who've been on the planet for the longest. However, they spent their entire lifetime learning about random white people. Yeah. So it's an uphill battle that we're
Because
fighting.
they're coming from their primary school, secondary school, which is
Exactly.
our K through 12,
Mhm.
and you're
Right.
getting 3 weeks.
Right.
At least it's mandatory. We don't
At
have
least
that
it's mandatory.
mandatory in the US.
They said it's only for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
not a semester.
No. Yeah. Some of us would like for it to be, if not a semester, an entire academic year, but some of us also have colleagues here at the Institute of African Studies say, oh, that'll take away from our research if we have to teach all these classes. What's the point? Okay. So this is a challenge. Yeah.
But is it 3 weeks, only like 4 hours a week, or is it like all day classes for 3
No,
weeks?
it's 3 hours
It's 3 hours
per week.
per week.
Yeah.
That's it. Wow.
9 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we can go back to Dignesh in Ethiopia, whose bones have been dated to 3.5 million years ago. Dignesh is what in English they refer to as Lucy. Dignesh means you are wonderful in Amarinya. So we're trying to pack 3.5 million years of history into 3 weeks. That's our challenge. So in terms of record keeping, we'll go back to Carter G. Woodson, who says those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. That's the point of why we're not taught our biography of history, so that you'll have no inspiration. You'll think the only way that I can be good is by being like these white people whose names I've heard of, right? And I've even had people say to me here in Ghana, oh, black people can never do anything good, only white people can do us good.
Wow.
I say that means you don't know anything. But we continue. Black
Lives matter.
African
Lives matter.
Now this is a quote from Dr. Renoko Rashidi, a noted historian who deals with the global African presence throughout the world. And he says, what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. What you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. What you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. That is told about yourself, right? So if you look at our situation here in Ghana and in Africa, a lot of it is attributed to miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. Because how can you get people to do well if they think, well, we've never done well before, we can't do well, we've never done anything. We're just all corrupt, we're just blah, blah, blah. So then you have nothing to aspire to other than just being like somebody else who's corrupt. All of this is intentional. There's a proverb in Wolof, Khamsa bopu morgana nuachlako. It translates to self-knowledge is better than being told about oneself. Right? We continue. Now, sometimes where it comes to ancient Kemet, what they refer to as ancient Egypt, they say, oh, well, those aren't black people, they're just very dark-skinned Caucasians. But if you put them up to the police gun test, they would shoot all of our black ancestors just the same as they shoot those of us who are on the street now. So what it comes down to is that the police are killing the living, whereas the so-called white scholars kill the dead by making you, one, not even know their names. Or if you do know their names, they'll say, no, those are white people. Right? So this is the situation that we're up against. We have Black Lives Matter in the US who is talking about our lives of those who are living matter, but what we need now is scholars who are saying the lives of our ancestors also matter. We have to know their names, and there's an African concept that no one really dies until their name is no longer spoken. Right? So this is how they are able to kill our ancestors, by making sure their names are no longer spoken. When I say to their descendants, have you ever heard of your ancestors? They say no. Or have you heard of Julius Caesar? Oh, of course, of course. Right? So again, if Imhotep was walking down the street, he'd get the Laquan McDonald treatment. Black, African, we continue. This is Namra. This is the founder of Kemet. This is the founder of ancient Kemet. Namra. Yep. Looking like a young Mike Tyson, I always say that if you look at him, right? Menchu Hotep. This is King Tut as he depicted himself. This is what they call Khafre. And then this is El Negro that I showed you before in Central America. We continue. And then even where it comes to contributors to Ghanaian society, most Ghanaians don't even know about Amon Kote, who designed the coat of arms of Ghana. So if you say, oh, have you ever heard of, just name any random white person. Oh, of course. If you're Amon Kote, no, who is that? Right? Or Theodosia Salome Oko, who designed the flag of Ghana, based on the black star line of Marcus Garvey. Very profound symbolism in there. Or Philip Beho, who did the national anthem of Ghana, or Michael Kwame Kojo, who did the words to that national anthem. Or Marcus Mosiah Garvey, for that matter, who contributed that black star to the flag. Right? If they've ever even heard the name, they say, oh yes, I heard him in a reggae song. Something, I don't know. This is our problem. Now, in terms of respect, no matter where the black man is, he will never be respected until Africa is a world power. Right? And this is why I'm here in Africa, to help Africa become a world power, by trying to wake up the people who are going into physics and biology and history and whatever subject they are. Right now, whatever degree they get, they're going to take that degree and go and serve their enemies. What I'm trying to get them to do is whatever field you're in, take that degree to serve your own people, to make Africa a world power, because a lot of the people who are rushing to go to America in order to work for America and make America whatever it was, that is a major problem because they are not building up Africa, they're building up their enemies, right? But we continue. Now, when we go to the black man, the black equal African man's respect in India, we find exactly that we're not respected anywhere in the world. So whereas they put a statue of Gandhi here, black people go to India and mob attack students, all these Africans who are going there being put in wheelchairs, African students targeted, African students protest, demand security, right? So how do we get respected if everybody in the world thinks you never did anything? Right? That's the whole point. We continue. Then we can look worldwide. While black Africans are becoming the target of racist attacks by Libya's new rulers. So this is happening in North Africa. Africans under siege in Moscow because your lives don't matter. You've never done anything. You've never contributed anything. So if you die, who cares? Right? Or if we kill you, who cares? Kenyan author attacked and beaten in Germany. U.S. student was shot in the head by police. This was a Ghanaian who was shot in the head. West Papua New Guinea genocide. So no matter where you go in the world, black people are not being respected, we're being killed. And a lot of that is attributed to, if you've never done anything good, then why do you even need to be here? And then even from our own perspective, if I've never done anything good, then why does somebody who looks like me need to be here? Let me just shoot him too. He's worthless. Right? Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Black sleep matters. Now this is another quote from Malcolm X, where he's talking to continental Africans, where he says, "Our problems are your problems. We have lived for over 300 years in that American den of racist wolves, in constant fear of losing life and limb. Recently, 3 students from Kenya were mistaken for American Negroes and were brutally beaten by the New York police. Shortly after that, 2 diplomats from Uganda were also beaten by the New York City police, who mistook them for American Negroes. If Africans are brutally beaten while only visiting in America, imagine the physical and psychological suffering received by your brothers and sisters who have lived there for over 300 years. Our problem is your problem. No matter how much independence Africans get here on the mother continent, unless you wear your national dress at all times when you visit America, you may be mistaken for one of us and suffer the same psychological and physical mutilation that is an everyday occurrence in our lives." So this is before the Black Lives Matter movement. He's describing exactly what's going on right now, right? Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Very good. And he continues, he says, "Your problems will never be fully solved until and unless ours are solved. You will never be fully respected until and unless we are also respected. You will never be recognized as free human beings until and unless we are also recognized and treated as human beings. Our problem is your problem. It is not a Negro problem nor an American problem. This is a world problem, a problem for humanity. It is not a problem of civil rights, it is a problem of human rights. It's an appeal to African heads of state in Cairo, Egypt." Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter. Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Very good. However, there are demands for self-respect. There's self-respect and then demands for self-respect. And some of that, we saw that with Colin Kaepernick. We saw that in Rhodes Must Fall. We saw that in Black Lives Matter and Say Her Name. We saw that in Gandhi's Statue Must Fall. We're saying we have to respect ourselves. If you have an enemy of black people who is fighting against black people, how come we have a statue for him, but we don't have a statue for a single African hero or heroine here on the university campus? Because if you think you never did anything, then how can you do a statue of just empty air? But if you actually know you did something, then you would have statues all over. But the situation on the ground is reflective of miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. So there's a continuity of Black Lives Matter. People think of this as a new thing. However, you had the case of Emmett Till, where Mimi Elizabeth Till Mobley said 2 months ago, I had a nice apartment in Chicago, I had a good job, I had a son. When something happened to Negroes in the South, I said, that's their business, not mine. Now I know how wrong I was. The murder of my son has shown me that what happens to any of us anywhere in the world had better be the business of us all. Have you ever sent a loved son on vacation and had him return to you in a pine box, so horribly battered and waterlogged that someone needs to tell you that this sickening sight is your son lynched? When people saw what happened to my son, men stood up who had never stood up before. And this was when people saw it in the Jet magazine. So before there was social media, there was Jet magazine showing us what was happening to us. Now, again, going into continuity, we can go into the 1800s. Ida B. Wells Barnett, who said, on the many inhuman outrages of this present year, the only case where the proposed lynching did not occur was where the men armed themselves in Jacksonville, Florida, and Paducah, Kentucky, and prevented it. The only times an Afro-American who was assaulted got away has been when he had a gun and used it in self-defense. This lesson teaches us, and which every Afro-American should ponder well, is that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home, and it should be used for that protection which the law refuses to give. When the white man who is always the aggressor knows that he runs as great a risk of biting the dust every time his Afro-American victim does, who have greater respect for Afro-American life. The more the Afro-American yields and cringes and begs, the more he has to do so, the more he is insulted, outraged, and lynched. This is Ida B. Wells Barnett speaking in 1892 and giving us the solution to our problem right now today. You had better defend yourself. If you plan on begging your enemy, you say, oh, look at what you've done to us. They're slapping high five in the boardroom. Yeah, good job. Right? They say, we know we're doing that to you. That's the whole plan. We continue. And then even before that, you had David Walker writing in 1830, where he says, now I ask you, had you not rather be killed than be a slave to a tyrant who takes the life of your mother, wife, and dear little children? Look upon your mother, wife, and children and answer God Almighty, and believe this, that it is no more harm for you to kill a man who is trying to kill you than it is for you to take a drink of water when thirsty. He's giving you the solution to your problem right now, right? Back in 1830, so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we can actually trace it back into the 1800s, back into the 1700s, back into the 1600s, back 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, as we were fighting this exact same Eurasian enemy that we're fighting right now, fighting for self-preservation. We continue. And then even before that, we can go into the 800s, the Zans Rebellion. This was the first rebellion of Africans in the diaspora anywhere, but it wasn't the Western diaspora, it was the Eastern diaspora, because Arabs were enslaving black people long before Europeans got the idea. So, let's go back. So the largest revolt by enslaved Africans was ignited by the Zanj against Arab slavers. The Zanj or Zinj were inhabitants of the land along the coast of East Africa. They were traded as slaves by Arabs and were made to work in cruel and human salt pans of Shat el-Arab near Basra in modern-day Iraq. Conscious of their large numbers and oppressive working conditions, the Zanj rebelled 3 times. The largest of these rebellions lasted from 868 to 883 AD, during which they inflicted repeated defeat on Arab armies sent to suppress the revolt. For some 14 years, they continued to achieve remarkable military victories and even built their own capital, Muqtada, the elect city. And again, you can read Ahmed Sarama and Runoko Rashidi, African presence in early Asia. Right? We continue. Now we can even go back 4,300 years ago. And this is Winnie. And he's talking about how the Africans came together to fight against their Eurasian enemies. African?
Lives matter.
And he says, when His Majesty took military action against the Asiatic sand dwellers, His Majesty made an army of many tens of thousands from all of Upper Kemet, from Yebu in the south to Medinit in the north, from Lower Egypt and from the 2 sides of the house, and from Sejer and Kensedru, from Irjet Nubians, Merjan Nubians, Yam Nubians, Mawat Nubians, Kao Nubians, and from Chimay. So he's talking about the very first Pan-African military force in the history of the entire planet Earth, where all the black people around came together to fight off these Eurasians who were again the aggressors, just like they are to this very day. So we've been fighting this fight for quite some time, but if we don't know our history, we'll just see all this writing here and say, oh, look at the pretty pictures, right? But we're trying to tell you this is something that's been going on for some time, and most likely will go on for some time until we solve the problem on the planet. Now, when it comes to African black self-preservation, oftentimes we're trying to put the mask on everybody else. We say, oh, look, Palestine, let's go fight for the Palestinians. Oh, look, Kosovo, Bosnia, let's go fight for them. Oh, let's fight for everybody else. But on the airplane, they say you should put the mask on yourself before you try to put it on everybody else in the world. So we, as black people, are the ones who have the problem. So if we can't breathe, maybe it's that we need to start dealing with our own problems and put the mask on ourselves before we try to solve everybody else on the planet's problems, right? And there's a proverb in Yoruba that say, which is we don't guard the head of someone else for the hawk to carry one's own away, right? So solve your own problems, black people, because you're the only ones who can or will or even desire to. So in conclusion, black
Lives matter.
African
Lives matter.
black
Lives matter.
African
Lives matter.
throughout space and time. Thank you very much.
You clarify confirm the reason behind the K and the C in Africa?
That's what this last slide is, because I figured somebody would ask. So if you look at the way Africa is spelled in various African languages, it's always spelled with a K. So back in the 60s, people came to, through Kiswahili, they came to realize Africa, when it's spelled in African languages, is spelled with a K. Let's do the same thing. So if you look at how it's spelled in Yoruba, Africa, Africa, Kiswahili Africa, isiZulu Africa, Kikongo Africa, Hausa Africa, Kirundi, Bufrika, all these languages, it's always spelled with a K. So out of solidarity, let's do the exact same thing and spell it with a K.
Oh man, I wish I would have known. I gotta change my logo.
All right. So usually you have people who
Damn.
come to whatever level of consciousness, they usually will spell it with a K, but that's the reason why. Because if we're spelling in African languages, we'll do it with a K. Also, what I mentioned to you before, the very first map was a south up map. So also when you see Africa depicted by people who know that, then they say, why did Eurasians decide to make it upside down and put north at the top? Let's do it like the very original map makers on the face of the planet did and keep it south up.
Upside down.
No, it's right side up. So it used to be right side up, now it's upside down. Are you following?
Yeah, do you have a visual?
Yeah, let me,
It's
actually did
that's
it.
powerful. It's awesome. Right?
Yeah, because I have a hard time following.
Just everything is upside down. Like, just
Flip a
flip
little
the entire
upside down.
world in your mind, and that makes sense.
Yeah, and not only literally metaphor, in all areas, everything is upside down.
Yeah.
Everything is upside down.
Yeah.
And backward.
Wait, so the current depiction of the world is
Upside down.
upside down.
Yeah.
What?
You gotta be on top of everything.
Yeah, it was from.
Psychological warfare.
It was
So
from.
if we were to actually look at it in space as an astronomer, we would see it
So
the other way around?
No, it looks the same. It's just literally you take the picture and you flip it upside down.
exactly. So
So if you look at it this way, it's this way. If you look at it this way.
so picture your head is a circle,
Uh-huh.
right? So a circle, it could be either way. It has two poles, so that's not going to change. But the question becomes: do I do the picture like this, which shows you as you are, or do I do this with the camera? So the Earth isn't changing position; it's how you orient the camera with regard to that Earth.
Okay.
So every single time I show you a picture, I do it like this. And no one is telling you, why are you flipping the camera upside down? The originators of a picture of the Earth, they did it right side up. What made you decide to turn your camera upside down and then show us that only for the last few thousand years? Ultimate Photoshop.
You were speaking.
Yeah, let me do this before.
Yeah.
So this is the oldest map of topological interest in the history of the world, the Turin Papyrus map.
Oh, we're not
You
speaking.
can't see.
Oh, let me put this as a slideshow. Good. And it was made by the scribe Amennath. This is the same Amen that we've been talking about before. Whenever you say at the end of your prayer, Amen, you're talking about the divinity of ancient Kemet, Amen. And Amennath means Amen is victorious. the son of Ipui, who was a scribe, and this is from 1160 BCE, over 3,000 years ago. And of course, it was a south-up orientation, showing a map to mines of a 15-kilometer stretch of Wadi Hamamat. So the map was south up. This is the very first map, south up. So anyone who does a map after that is doing something different from the originators of map making. And we have a geography department. I just met a sister who was there, and I was like, oh, it's the first thing they tell you about the Aminat map. They call it the Turin papyrus map because whenever they steal something, they take it to Turin, Italy, or wherever, then they name it after either the thief or the den of thieves where they've taken it to. And then this is, again, along those same lines. Not only was Resi, this is how you write Resi, that was associated with Shamal, that's upper Kemet. So up is in the south, Resi, that's up, right? And then Mahud, that's lower Kemet. Mahib is the north. So low is north. Up is south, low is north. But even more profound than that, Yabit is the word for east and also the left hand. This means Sudan is on the left. The word for east and left are the same. That means the sun is rising on my left. From the perspective of Kemet, the sun is rising on my left. And then Imen, this is right hand, right side in the west. This means the same word for right is a word for west. This means Dakar, Senegal is on my right hand side. Ghana, West Africa is on my right hand side. So the entire orientation is that left is east, Somalia. Right is west, Senegal, Cape Verde. Up is south. So even in the words themselves in ancient Kemet, they were telling you this is the orientation of the world. Black?
Lives matter.
African?
Lives matter.
Now, if you don't know that you invented map making, then you go along with the upside down map, as opposed to seeing the world like this and showing the camera like this, doing the camera like this, because what we're used to is a camera like this, to the point where even if I show it to you like this, you're like, oh, why is it upside down? No, it's restored to right side up. And what this is actually showing is African people throughout the world. So when we talk about Kemet, we can talk about ancient Kemet. That was the indigenous name for what they now refer to as Egypt, land of black people. But we can think about it in a broader sense as modern Kemet, all these lands of black people, places where black people are, lands of black people, which is, you know, once we solidify that, it's a super state, it's a huge type of concept. All of that's the land of black people. And this is occupied territory, which has been stolen by these Arabs that we find there right now. So once we understand that all of this was the land of black people, then it comes down to we need to make it the land of black people again. So that's actually a different presentation that I went into about a week or two ago. About lots of information.
We were talking earlier about the way that the story of the Egyptians and the Hebrews was flipped in the Bible.
Right.
Do you have any slides or anything dedicated to telling that story, or can you tell us a little bit more about how that story got flipped?
It's also 10.
Oh, it's 10 now? Okay. All right, so let's do a brief question and answer, but I also wanted to take you all to the Cultural Center because I know you have 11 o'clock as well, and then I have something too. That's actually a research project that I'm working on right now, but what I can show you is the Stela of Meron Patah, which is the very first time Israel, some of the things I mentioned to you previously, the very first time Israel was mentioned anywhere was on this particular stela. And matter of fact, let me do this. So this is a translation of the text, the relevant text. So I'll show you an actual picture of that stone, and then this is the translation. So it says, the princes are prostrate, saying shalom. Not one of the 9 bows lifts its head. Chehenu is vanquished, Kati is at peace, Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered, Gezer seized, Yanuam made non-existent. Israel's wasted, bare of seed. And this is, again, the very first time Israel is mentioned anywhere on the face of the planet as an enemy of Kemet. Kor has become a widow for Kemet. All who roamed have been subdued by the king of Upper and Lower Kemet. Banere Meramun, son of Re, Merenptah, content with Ma'at, given life like Re, the sun, every day. And now let me show you where that's coming from. This is another text that I cited for you yesterday, and it's coming from her tech and her obelisk there at Ipet Sut, what they call the temple at Karnak. And it says, I raised up what was ruined for the first time since the Amu, these Eurasians, were in the midst of the delta who wear it, the foreigners in their midst destroying what was made. So she's saying when these Hyksos came in, that she, for the very first time since their time, is raising up what they had destroyed.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Two questions. Who are the modern day Hyksos?
Mm-hmm. So those are what we now identify as Southwestern Eurasians.
Okay.
So when we talk about like the population of modern day Israel, these are European Jew converts who were looking for a place to basically steal. They were looking at Uganda, they were looking at South America. Eventually they decided on Israel, what we now know as Israel, and then took that land. But what we're talking about in terms of this ancient Israel is, let me actually show you a picture.
So, but the Hyksos today are now Italian, Spanish,
No.
German.
These would be what we now would refer to as generally Arabs, Bedouins, those people.
Okay.
Right?
And my other question was, between this time when she's saying she rose Kemet back up to what they've broken down,
Mm-hmm.
how much time was between?
So we're talking about between 1 and 200 years. So first let me deal with each one at its time. So this is how the Amu Hyksos were depicted by the people of Kemet, and this is what I was describing to y'all yesterday. So here, this is Ramesh, these are the people of Kemet, and it shows two different types, this one and this one. In Nehesi, it shows two different types, this one and this one. This shows the Amu, and this is what the Hyksos were coming from, this type and this type. And it shows the Chimhu, and these are the invaders to North Africa who are already in Libya by this time. This is, going relatively late in the history of Kemet by the time of Ramesses III. So this is a reproduction. This is an actual photograph of how the people of Kemet depicted themselves, right, as jet black. Now we come to this is the other text I mentioned to you yesterday. And this is by Kambon, who was one of the initiators, along with Second and Ray Powell, who started the expulsion, where he talks about the destruction they make inside this Kemet. They who made them commit to you serve for the Amu, and I showed you a picture of the Amu is talking about the Hyksos, when they overran Kemet, their mistress. That is probably a call from those who are reading it. Martin? You may not. If you are doing it, you will have any point you So that is actually my next meeting, and they said they're there waiting for me. So lots of information, but I'll actually give a presentation on that, and that will actually feature in the book that I'm working on,
Okay.
which is the ancient African origins of Pan-Africanism. But one of the oldest texts that goes into the identification of the Hyksos with the Hebrews is Josephus Flavius in his text Against Apion, where he says that, this expulsion, this so-called exodus, was the Hyksos who were driven out of Kemet. They came in as invaders and then they were driven out of Kemet. Manetho also talks about this exodus, talking about the Hyksos coming in and then being driven out. They came as invaders, they were driven out. Apion. So you have various, scholars from the Greek times who are saying those Hyksos and those Hebrews are the exact same, they're one and the same. So they were driven out, they went out and established Israel, and then the rest is history, or the rest is biblical gobbledygook.
Because Josephus wrote the Bible, right?
So what they did is they plagiarized multiple texts from ancient Kemet without giving attribution. So to say that they wrote it.
Well, I
is
mean,
yeah, they
compiled
compiled what they
evidence
stole
and
at
then
the time
what
that they were in Kemet.
and what they wanted people to believe.
Right. So even when we talk about, when they talk about Yah and Yahweh, that is Yah, the lunar deity of Kemet, where Yahmos, the one who kicked them out, that was in his name, the name of the lunar deity at that time. But for the sake of time, we're going to have to wrap up. Any last questions as we close out? We'll come here.
Regarding what's going on after, like the duality of the universe, do you believe that somehow, in the larger scheme of things, that this may continue perpetually, or do you believe that it's just a cyclical thing where one time we rule, now we don't rule, and then it's just a matter of time to rule again, and that's its own perpetual cycle as well?
So when we're talking about the Hyksos, we're talking about an intermediate period. Now that intermediate period lasted about the same length of time that America has been in existence. So even when and America wasn't a world power throughout that entire time, we're talking about 1776, it hasn't been a world power. It basically rose to be a world power since World War I. So the tendency could be to think about the way things are now like they've always been that way. But what we're in right now is just a blink of an eye in terms of the course of human history for Black people. So this is an extremely, extremely short period of time. And that is just to say that this is everything, as we talked about yesterday with Dikenga, everything in the world, everything that has ever existed follows this cycle. So it comes up to its high point and then it sets. So what we see now is a high point for the Eurasians, but they will eventually set. What we see is perhaps a low point for us, but we will eventually rise. That's how everything works. That's how stars are born and then die. That's how solar systems are born and die. That's how the universe was born and then eventually it will come to its completion. That's how people are born and die. Everything follows this cycle. Yep.
So it's sort of up to us to recognize that cycle and help with the rising.
Yep, to play our part.
To play our part.
Would you be willing to send us the first PowerPoint?
Yeah, no problem. And this is Amos, who drove out the Hyksos. Looking blacker than everybody here in this room. This is his mummy.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's his nose. That's his eye. That's his mouth. This is his head. This is his skin. All right, and this is his body wrapped here.
I feel like you can't, you should lose your American passport so you can come and just do lectures all around the country.
I have no intention of ever setting foot on U.S. soil.
I don't blame you.
They should come here to see.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Birthright.
Yeah.
Well, you
I
record
don't
your
agree
stuff.
with
You
you.
record it even right now, right?
Yeah, anytime I do anything, I record it so you can always find anything that I do.
You have a website or?
Yeah, the site is Abibitumi Casa, and it's also an app.
It's basically the Wi-Fi.
This is the site, Abibitumi Casa. And if you go here and then join the community, it's an all African, which equals Black site, with people from all throughout the world who are about African, which equals Black liberation. And then also the app, you can find it if you just do a search for Abibitumi Casa. You can download the app and then join that as well. I have Android on my laptop, so I can actually show you. So people start different topics. This is the talk that I gave before that I gave you, that snippet that showed Africa right side up, on pan-Kemetism, emancipation of African equals black people and the land of African equals black people. So everybody starts up topics about Dr. Ben's library, reparations, retribution, all these things. So if you go on, then you can just see all of those, and then you can browse in. We have the African Language Institute, which is, of course, dedicated to various African languages. Then the African Liberation Institute, which has sections on health, education, economics, politics, military, so forth and so on. Every aspect of African life. And we have multiple news feeds, so anything that has anything to do with Africa that's news in the world, it comes there first. So it's like an aggregate of everything that has anything to do with black people, anywhere in the world. That's how I stay up on stuff, because I have a few thousand people who are keeping me up on stuff.
That's amazing.
All right, so again,
Wait,
I'm
one
gonna have
more
to
question.
run. Okay, yes.
We gotta roll.
And then this is the app you can find on the App Store, Bibi to Mi Casa. You'll
5
find it,
stars.
yeah, Play Store, App Store.
5 black stars.
Black Star. There you go. Yes.
I'll give it two in one.
Mhm.
So talking about the Black Lives Matter,
Mhm.
asking about the value. So I was at the African American ground. I was speaking to one of the tour guides there, and they were saying that melanin is worth more than gold. I wanted to know what the actual value of melanin is. And
The actual value of what?
Melanin.
Melanin, okay.
And then some information about the great Earth Valley.
Mhm.
That's it.
Okay, I've heard multiple things in the same thing in terms of melanin being for sale. There are often stories, as a matter of fact, I was just reading one, that when black people are going up to places like Libya and trying to cross the Mediterranean, and oftentimes their kidneys they're first killed, their kidneys are taken out, all their organs, so forth and so on, are stripped out and then sold on the open market. I've also heard about melanin being for sale, the same way, for multiple thousands of dollars. I don't have an exact value because I haven't bought any melanin, and I'm not aware of where the marketplaces are where they sell it.
I can tell you right now. The
Right.
price per gold per gram is $41, and the price of melanin per gram is $350. It's the most expensive thing that exists.
What is it used for? What is it used for?
I know. So,
I've seen texts. Matter of fact, there was a sister out of East Africa who was using melanated hair in order to conduct electricity. So, as a semiconductor, as things of that nature. So, industrial uses, things of that nature. But then also you have melatonin injections. You have Europeans. Matter of fact, there was this white woman out of, I want to say, Germany. Who got injections or whatever to try to make herself black. So this is, what's going on. In terms of the Great Rift Valley, up until about a month or two ago, the oldest bones were found in what we call the Omo River Valley. All of these are contiguous valleys that are found at the source of the Nile. And the oldest bones of modern Homo sapiens sapiens were Omo 1 and Omo 2. They were dated to 195,000 years ago. Just about a month or so ago, there were other bones that were found in Morocco. And what that goes into is what's referred to as the Green Sahara. And basically every 41,000 years, and the last time that it was this way was about 5,000 years ago for a brief period, and then 11,000 years ago for a little bit longer period. And you can actually look at a documentary called The Black Mummy of the Green Sahara. And in it, dating back 5,600 years ago, they found a mummy of a 2-year-old boy who was jet black and who was eviscerated, meaning that his intestines had been taken out and he had been deliberately preserved in a sack of antelope skin. And what all this goes into is that because of the tilt of the Earth's orbit every 41,000 years, it goes from here to being desert, to here being green, to here being desert, to here being green. So right now, obviously, we're in a desert period. But anyway, in Morocco, they found more bones of modern Homo sapiens sapiens that are dated to 300,000 years ago. So basically they say, oh, this is gonna rewrite all the history books, because basically it's gonna have to take into account this cycle of black people going from the Sahara over to what we now call sub-Saharan Africa and the Nile Valley, back to the Sahara, back to those places, back to the Sahara, back to those places, every 41,000 years, going back 300,000 years, which is about, it allows for about 7 cycles of that happening from that time up to now.
They also use melanin because white people's skin can't absorb light, or it reflects it, well, any kind of rays. And so if someone wants like a laser treatment, they inject melanin into their skin so that it'll actually absorb the laser.
And this also ties into climate change. There was an article that came out through Bibi Tumikasa about a year or so ago, and it was saying that by 2050, there are going to be parts of Africa and southwestern Eurasia, so-called Middle East, that will be uninhabitable by white folks because of the intensity of the sun's rays. That's expected that temperatures will, be around over 100 degrees, Fahrenheit. And basically what this is just as we're talking about these cycles, is that, we talk about everybody else has nuclear weapons. We have the most powerful nuclear weapon in the solar system, which is the sun, on our side. So even though they're trying to destroy black people, eventually everybody's going to have to be black, because the sun is going to make, if you go outside, then that's exactly what it's going to do. So we got a huge nuclear weapon that by 2050 will be kicking into high gear. And we all going to be black. The polar ice caps are melting. I was looking at another article that came through Bibi Tumikasa that said a chunk of Antarctica had broken off the size of Rhode Island. So that is a huge fissure. It's going to go out into the open ocean and melt. And when it melts, a lot of the sea levels are going to rise. And what is beautiful about that is a lot of these ports where our ancestors were enslaved through, Rio de Janeiro, New York City, Amsterdam, Manchester, all these places are going to be underwater. And that's very much in the lines of reciprocity, that they themselves are doing what's necessary to destroy all those places, and also to destroy themselves so that they won't even be able to be white anymore if they plan on existing.
All right, we
don't have to roll. We can keep going.
Let's do this question while we're walking towards the next spot.
Because I got to break down my stuff.
First of all, thank you so much.
I wanted to show you my own picture of the Mariposa Stella, but I didn't have time. But you can actually, you can actually just find it online if you just type in Mariposa Stella.